Hi, I'm Carrie. I work with CCUA, and today, in a continuation of our garden side chats, we are going to talk about how to start seeds inside to transplant them out into your garden, and how you can care for them in the time from planting to transplanting. So today we're going to start some stuff, and my goal is to keep it alive in our office and care for it in our office, put them under our grow lights, and then later in this series we will transplant them into our garden, so you'll kind of be able to follow along exactly with what we're doing and kind of be able to compare yours from ours, because growing seedlings in a house is way harder than in a greenhouse. It's still totally doable, but just don't be hard on yourself. We'll go through all the tricks today in the garden side chat video. Okay, so let's just jump right in. Let's see, I brought a few different containers that you can start things in. You can get really creative. I just grabbed a few things right quick. So we have these peat cell packs. You can find these in plastic, but Jiffy's making them in these peat pots, and they're nice. You can transplant this directly into your garden. You would just tear one of these little cells off, pop it right into your garden. So we'll use some of those today. I picked these up a couple weeks ago at Lowe's. They're pretty cheap. Jiffy also makes these little pellets that have this indent. You put the seed in the indent and water it, and the pellet kind of expands. A lot of people use these. They're pretty cheap, very space efficient. And then again, you can just plant this directly in your garden, which is nice and easy. Also, if you didn't want to buy anything, there's so many different ways you can start seeds in your house without buying anything that you probably don't already have just in your waste stream, or just laying around your house. So one really easy one is yogurt containers. So I just found this in our recycling just a couple minutes ago. I don't really even know what these are. I found these in our recycling a couple minutes ago. Perfect sizes for starting things in your house. Honestly, you want them to be probably a little darker than this. The darker the better, because roots don't like light. They have evolved to grow underground for a reason, where it's dark. So, the darker the better. These I can see from where I'm standing, my fingers kind of through them. So they'll still work. Maybe not the most ideal. I've seen so many different containers, other than plastic, single-use little cups. If you wanted to get really creative, you could make little newspaper boxes, kind of like an origami style. Put some potting mix and plant the seed in that. That would be great. That would be just like the peat pot, in that you could plant that directly into your garden. Make sure it's not the glossy paper. You don't want to use the glossy paper and put that in your garden. Just kind of like the standard old school newspaper. So yeah, really let your imagination run wild. Really the only thing I wouldn't recommend putting a young plant start in is anything that's not malleable. So all of these things, you can squeeze the sides and tear it apart and do all this stuff to it. But a little tiny terracotta pot, a soup can, stuff like that wouldn't be ideal, because you really need to kind of massage the roots and the soil block out of the container in order to get the plant going. So another thing you want to do, make sure of, other than having it be opaque, having it be malleable on the sides, is you need to have drainage holes. And so obviously these yogurt cups and whatever these are don't have drainage holes, but we want to make sure that the water can kind of move through. So I'm going to poke, I brought this nail out. I'm just going to poke a hole in, oh my goodness, I can do it, in the bottom of the yogurt container. And you don't need a ton of holes. You just need a few. I'll probably do 3 on this one. So yeah, something like that, just to let the water go through as you're watering them. Let's see, try to do one on these. There we go. Actually, this plastic might be a little thin for using a nail, but you get the picture. These Jif peat pots have drainage holes in the bottom, and the peat pot itself allows it to dry out and kind of drain on its own, just because it's a pervious container. Another thing you want to make sure of is you don't want it to be like a gigantic container for a little tiny plant. So like this size yogurt container is great, but a quart size yogurt container for like a lettuce plant, as you see how small they are, that would be too big, for a couple reasons. One, the roots of the lettuce plant just like won't, at this stage in their life, won't fill out that whole quart. So you're kind of wasting some potting mix, maybe wasting a little bit of space. Another thing that is really relevant in this conversation is that it could hold too much moisture, and it could be a little too cool, not enough air circulation, and if there's too much moisture in those conditions in your house, there can be some fungal issues that can be really rough on your plant. So you want to kind of make sure the containers are small. So like these individual sized yogurt containers, 1.5 inches by 2 inches or whatever dimensions would work fine. And most things you would just start in that, and then you'd be able to transplant out in that size. If you want to, we'll talk about it later, like if you want to do tomatoes and peppers, you can start them in like a container like this, and then when they get a little bit bigger, you can put them in a larger container. We call that potting up. And you want to pot up those plants instead of just starting them in like the big container to start with, because there'll be definitely some like moisture control issues in that manner. Okay, so for what it's worth, you can see here at work we have this little spatula I'm going to use real quick. We use none of these techniques. We use something that's called soil blocks. So I'll just pop 4 out. So we make these little soil cubes. There's 4 right here. And you can see all the roots kind of growing through them, and then we can kind of gently break them off when we transplant. That's a really efficient way for us to start all of our thousands of starts. Reduces the amount of like plastic or peat pots or whatever that we have to buy, and it makes it really easy and really quick to transplant. You can buy a soil blocker online. So if you're like really into that concept, you can do it. You do have to use a very special potting mix that you would probably have to make on your own. We make it here. But it's really doable. It's kind of like it's kind of like art class, like in elementary school where you're like molding clay and stuff. It's really pretty fun. It's like a mix of like baking cookies, like sugar cookies with the cookie cutter, and art class where you're molding clay. So it's fun. It's easy to transplant them, but maybe not the most transferable method to like a home garden. So that's why we're going to focus on these today. Okay, so I have a little bit of just potting mix, kind of, normal potting mix in here. The white little bits are called perlite. They're a kind of like a rock that facilitates drainage. You definitely want perlite in your mix. Most of this mix is peat moss. You definitely want a peat moss based product. It holds water really well, but it also has a good amount of drainage, especially with the perlite. There's additionally just a little bit of fertilizer in here because the starts, once they get past, once they have true leaves past their cotyledons, they'll need a little bit of fertilizer to kind of like give them the energy to keep going. The fertilizer is in such a small amount you can't actually even see it. So you just really see the peat moss and the perlite. But it is important to have a little bit of like a charger fertilizer because the young plants need food right away. The The first two leaves that pop out when a plant germinates are called cotyledons, and they will feed the plant until the plant makes true leaves, like you see here. And then once the plant makes true leaves, they're using the sun and nutrition from the soil to grow big and strong. So you definitely need a little bit of fertilizer, because peat moss and perlite don't really offer much in that way. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fill these little like cells, and I'm going to do just one of these trays of the Jiffy cells, and then I'll kind of do the yogurt container and the peat pellet as well. Okay, so there's that. I'm gonna use my one with the hole and just kind of scoop some up. I have a hole in this one too, so I'm going to scoop some up there. I didn't make a hole in this one, so I'm going to set it aside. And then I'm also, just for fun and just to like trial, see like what works easier so that we can report back, I'm going to do some of these peat pellets. Okay, so for the vessels that I filled up with potting mix, you can see that I, for the most part, did not fill them all the way to the top. You do want a little bit of space between the top of the potting mix and the rim of the container. You can kind of see in most places there's a nice little like barrier, and that will just let like the water kind of set and percolate in. You also want it on a tray, so I brought this like old food service tray out because, you know, it's going to get wet. And you just want to make sure that whatever surface you keep these on your house, you're okay with it getting it wet. So I thought I would bring a couple different seeds today and just like kind of talk about things, one, that you would be transplanting right now anyway, the things that we're transplanting. And I also brought a couple things that maybe aren't like appropriate necessarily for the calendar, but I thought I would start off with them because the seed is bigger, and maybe just to kind of like illustrate a point, and then we can get to starting the seeds that are seasonally appropriate. So these are beans. You wouldn't ever start beans, you can just direct seed them, but they're nice and big, so I think for the demonstration they could be helpful. So these are really cool beans. They're a type of wax bean. They kind of look like little cows, like little dairy cows. So anyway, so the point is, you want, the bigger the seed, the deeper you're going to plant it, because this seed means that this size of the seed means that there's a lot of stored energy, and it has more energy to grow through the soil before it pops out and starts seeing the sun. In contrast, a tomato seed, oh gosh. So here's one tomato seed. So in contrast, like a tomato seed is very, very tiny. Tomato seeds aren't the smallest seeds that we plant, but they're amongst the smallest. So that's why I wanted to start with a bean seed, because it's harder to see tomato seeds. So if you were to plant a bean in your house, all you would do is fill your little vessel up, and then you would stick the bean in. And for a bean, I would just plant it stick it down to the end of my fingernail right there, or I guess the beginning of my fingernail. So I would just put the bean in, and then I would just go boop, and there it goes, it's in. And then I would cover it up, and then I would water it. So depending on the size of seed, you want to plant it shallow, or you want to plant it a little bit deeper. Smaller, shallower, bigger, deeper. So if you think about like evolution, think about like a tomato growing in the wild, or even a tomato growing in your garden that's going to volunteer itself. The tomato fruit gets overripe, falls off the vine, and then just sits on the ground. And then it kind of rots into the ground, and all the seeds are just kind of sitting on top of the ground. And then they're going to sprout, and then they're going to grow back into a fruiting plant. So you want to try to mimic those like natural systems as best you can. So if it's a tiny seed that just kind of gets dropped on the ground, you kind of just want to mimic that. So that was kind of a demonstration with a larger seed so that you could see it, because I didn't know if you would see the tomato seeds. So I pulled the bean back out. So right now, the things that we have been growing in our greenhouse, as you can see, is predominantly lettuce. Everything, not everything, but almost everything that you see right here is lettuce. All of this is lettuce. The only thing on this side of our hardening off area that is not lettuce is at the very last little tiny tray, and that's got some scallions, some kohlrabi on it, some kale, but everything else, this is all lettuce. So you can definitely start lettuce right now. We're also starting, like I said, kale and kohlrabi, collard greens. You can start right now. Swiss chard, you can start right now. So lots of greens. You can start cilantro, or you can just direct seed it in your garden. Either one would work. Kale, Swiss chard, tomatoes, peppers, eggplant. Those are all things that you can just now start in your house. Not every single plant needs to be started in a greenhouse or inside to produce the vegetable or fruit that you're going for, but there are some that definitely do. And tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants, those need to be started inside and live for 2 months before they can be transplanted outside. And that's just because our season here in mid-Missouri is not the right environment for a tomato seed to be planted outside and then grow into a tomato plant by the end of the year. So we need to give them that kind of like boost when it's still spring out. So here at work, you know, we start the tomatoes, peppers mid to late March, sometimes early April if we're trying to stagger some plantings. So we're just at the beginning of this season, which is fun. So today I think we'll plant a couple tomato seeds and then some greens, and then we'll talk about how to take care of them, and then I'll go back and take care of them and bring them out in a couple weeks. So let's start with Swiss chard. Swiss chard's a fun seed because to me it looks like a little meteor. So this is what Swiss chard looks like. He's like all bumpy, and there's crevices, and there's like little like points and stuff. So most seed is just like one plant comes from one seed. Swiss chard and beets are a little bit different because I guess the seed is so small. This is actually multiple seeds together. So I wouldn't be surprised if this produced like 2 or 3 little Swiss chard plants. But what I'm going to do to kind of like hedge my bets is to plant 2 Swiss chard seeds per cell that I'm going to do. So I'll do 2 Swiss chard, 2 kale, 2 lettuce, and maybe 2 cilantro. That's what I'll do. So I'm just going to plant these 2 containers of Swiss chard. You can see I put 2 little seeds in each container, put the seed back, and then I'm just going to kind of gently push them in, maybe 1/4 of an inch. And then I'm going to, in doing so, I covered one of the 4. But for the ones that I didn't cover, I'm just going to kind of push the potting mix back over it and then just kind of tap it down gently. And then I'll water it. And I'll water everything at the end. Let me back up just really quick and say it would be good to label what you are starting on any of the containers before you forget. Because you might. I've done it multiple times, and every year I'm like, I'm not going to forget, and then I forget which one's my kohlrabi versus my kale, and I can't tell them apart until it's too late. Okay, so that was Swiss chard. We got Swiss chard over here. Now we're going to do some lacinato kale, which is a beautiful dark green kale. Some people call it dino kale. So kale seed's pretty small. Also going to be really hard to see because it's the same color as the potting mix, but I thought I would kind of show you what it looks like. Whoops, there goes one. So just like the Swiss chard, I'm going to put 2 seeds. Just going to drop 2. Let's see if we can capture this. Drop 1, drop 2 seeds in these 2 cells. So I'm planting a total of 4 seeds, 2 per like little cell. So kale is smaller than Swiss chard, so I'm going to plant it even more shallowly than the Swiss chard. So I'm just going to barely push it in. I'm not really even going to like push it into, and then I'm just going to kind of like even out the potting mix around it. So it's like hardly covered. Covered, but hardly covered. All right, that's the Swiss chard. I mean, no, that's the kale. Sorry. Kale. So now we'll do head lettuce. So head lettuce. So kind of the rule of thumb is if you want head lettuce, we start all of our head lettuce. So like all of these little individual lettuce plants will grow into a head of lettuce. A lot of people in their garden grow like baby leaf lettuce, and in that case, I wouldn't transplant. If you want like baby leaf, I would just direct seed that out in your garden. But if you want head lettuce, it would be good to start it inside. So head lettuce, small like kale, but not round. It's kind of like flat and oblong. So again, just like the kale and just like the Swiss chard, we'll do a couple seeds per cell. Yeah, the seed's so small I don't even know if you can see me drop them in. Some lettuce is white, some lettuce seed is white, some is like tan like this. So the white's always easier to see, but you just kind of have to pay attention. So again, just kind of like gently pushing it in. Just like so, barely covering it with the potting mix. There. Okay, now we'll do cilantro. Like I said earlier, cilantro doesn't need to be started, but it's fun to, so why not? So I'm also going to do something a little bit different with the cilantro. So cilantro is fun because cilantro is an herb and a spice. Kind of the plant is an herb and spice all in one. So the leaves are the herbs, that's cilantro, and then the seeds, after it flowers, the seeds are coriander. So you can also use this in your cooking, grind it up, or you can, if you have cilantro that's going to seed in your garden, you can just let it drop its seed and it will reseed itself, and then you'll have another cilantro patch growing in the same spot in the fall. Cilantro, although it's usually paired with peppers and tomatoes, really doesn't love growing in the summer. It's more of a spring and fall plant. Because cilantro can be grown very close together and you can just kind of go down the row and cut it, I'm going to sprinkle like a few, more than 2. I'm going to, probably up to 10, just kind of all over the cell. And this is by far the biggest seed we're planting today, so it's a lot easier to see it than maybe the kale was. So that looks good to me. Put it back in the seed packet. So since it's a little bit bigger and I kind of planted it all around, what I'm going to do is get my potting mix back and then just kind of sprinkle some more over it. Just kind of like so. Great. Okay. So now what we'll do in these containers is we'll do some tomatoes. And then we'll talk about potting up the tomatoes in a little bit when they need to be potted up. The tomatoes, like I said earlier, will kind of live inside for 6 to 8 weeks. All of the stuff we just planted in here will only need to live inside for about a month. And then they can be transplanted outside. So they have just a quicker turnaround in general than the tomatoes. Okay. So this looks like it's a slicing tomato. The variety, is delicious. We get a whole bunch of seeds donated, so I've never grown this variety before, but it looks like it's a nice red slicing tomato. So again, these are the little tomato seeds. So, and these pellets, these are like really easy. Actually, I probably should have pre-soaked them. So maybe I'll pause and pre-soak them first. So let's just put them in these containers. So I'm going to kind of do 4, or try to do 4. I did a little bit more seeds per container. The reason why you do more than 1 seed per container is because the germination rate is never 100%. So that means like you never get 100% of plants sprouting out of the seeds you planted. You know, inevitably there's, you know, a dud in the mix, or maybe it rots, or maybe something comes along and eats it. So you're by overplanting, you're kind of giving yourself a little bit of a wiggle room, and you're most likely going to thin some of these out. So again, the tomato seeds real small, so I just kind of barely push them in, and then I'm just gently covering them with the potting mix. Okay. So another thing is, this is just like good garden habits. You don't want your seed to get wet, because that could wreak some havoc. So I'm gonna get my seed out of the way before I bring the watering can out. Okay, so I'm gonna seed these 3 after we kind of water everything and let them kind of expand a little bit. So then you plant everything, you got it on your water catchment tray, and then you're gonna water it, of course. You want to have something with what we call like a rose, so something that's got a lot of little holes, so it's not just like, you know, a pitcher of water or a sink faucet, which like at this stage in the game is a little too intense. You want it just kind of like a gentle rainfall, if you will. So, you know, something like this, and this is why you have the tray, because you get water everywhere. And you want to make sure that the peat moss is not wet, but that it's damp. So you can definitely have too wet. Like too wet can definitely be a thing. Too dry is also definitely like an issue. Let's see, let's kind of set these. The table is kind of slanted downhill a little bit, so all the water's kind of settling. The thing with the peat pots is that the peat itself will suck up water. So all of this water that's like sitting at the bottom of this tray will ultimately be sucked up by the peat pot itself, and the whole container will be kind of moist, which is actually what you want, because if you keep this on the dry side, it will just continuously suck moisture from the potting mix, and so you kind of want the whole thing a little bit damp. And it'll take a second, because it just will take a little bit for the peat to kind of like get damp and absorb some water. Kind of the same with these pellets. It'll take a little time to kind of like grow. So let's just plant those right now with the tomato seed. And as you can see in this scenario, there's no like real covering of the seed. And in general, oftentimes that's okay with really small seeds. Some seed definitely needs darkness in order to germinate, but these tomatoes should be fine. So I'll shake out a few tomato seeds. Sorry, this is... Oh. Probably using my wrong hand, so I'll do that hand. One more. There. Okay, so these are tomatoes. These are tomatoes. They're all the same variety of tomatoes, called Delicious. And then they're watered. I'm going to continue checking on these pellets, because the pellets should get about this tall. So we'll do a little update on them tomorrow, so everyone can kind of see like how they're going to grow over time. Okay, so that's how you start the seeds in your house. You want to make sure to check them for soil moisture every day. So put them somewhere where you're going to remember to go visit them. And how you're going to check for soil moisture is kind of just touching the soil. If it's damp, it's good. If it's wet, that's too wet. So you just want to keep them damp. Another thing is, vegetable plants are not like house plants as far as light requirements go. They really do like a lot more light than most of your house plants. So find the sunniest window, but you also might have to do things like rotate the tree every day so they don't grow towards the light, or even consider investing in a grow light that you can get from a hardware store. We use a couple grow lights at work. I'm going to put these under grow lights, so take that into account. You want the grow light to only be like about this far from the plants. It needs to be really close because they are light loving plants, and if they don't get enough light, they'll start growing in a way that we call leggy, which is they'll just get taller and taller and taller looking for the light, and then they'll kind of flop over because they won't be you know, structurally sound. They also like warmth. So I keep my house at 65, which is a little too cold for like kind of quick germination for these things. So just find like a warm little spot in your house. The top of the fridge is always really warm because that's where a lot of like the heat waste of your refrigerator is going. It's going up. So it's a little bit warmer. A sunny windowsill can be warmer. But you definitely want them kind of, if you can, in the high 60s, 70s range. That will be where you get the best germination. Most plants will be ready, like I said, most plants would be ready in about a month to start, or from start to transplant. The tomatoes in about a month or so will probably be ready to be potted up, and we can do that together. So yeah, just keep them warm, keep them well lit, especially like you might think like, oh, I'm gonna plant these, I've got time, I don't need to go get a light right away. But like once the plant pops out of the soil, it immediately needs light. So you really want to like have all your ducks in a row before you think you need them. So warmth, water, and light will be what you need, and just daily care. Your garden always does better if you visit it more often, and that starts with your little tiny baby plants inside. So go visit them, take care of them, and they'll do wonders for you. I think that's it in a nutshell as far as starting seeds in your home. So on behalf of everyone from CCUA, I just want to thank you for tuning in for these Gardenside Chats. I hope you learned something today. Feel free to ask any questions or type them in and we'll answer them for you. You know, gardening is, like I said yesterday, gardening is an act of hope for the future. So, you know, in these times when we don't really know what's going on, it's a good, really grounding hobby to get yourself into. So please like, plant, and subscribe to see our future content, and visit our website at columbiaurbanaG.org for more information and to learn about our mission and our vision for our community. So thanks a lot for tuning in.